I found a Mafia boss's kidnapped son hiding behind a dishwasher, and the armed men hunting him were already inside the building. His name was Rodri Bellucci, 7 years old, blonde hair matted with tears, a worn teddy bear with one missing eye clutched in his trembling hands. And when he opened his mouth to scream, no sound came out, just silent, gasping terror that made my blood run cold. I was Anne Crawford, 26, invisible maid working the pre-dawn shift at Boston's Ashworth estate. I had $31,247 in savings, 2 years of working 3 jobs condensed into a number that still wasn't enough to save my dying brother. I came to work early because I'd missed the last bus, because I had nowhere else to go, because staying invisible was how I survived. But you can't stay invisible when a child is begging you for help. Please, Rodri whispered, so quiet I almost missed it, each word seeming to cost him everything. Please don't tell them where I am. The uniform he wore cost more than I made in 3 months. Navy blazer, embroidered crest, St. Bernard's Preparatory Academy, where Boston's elite sent their children. And I recognized his face from the photographs I dusted every Wednesday in Mr. Ashworth's office. This was Silvio Bellucci's son. Even I knew that name. You didn't live in Boston without hearing whispers about the man who owned half the city's politicians and all of its shadows. The most dangerous man in Massachusetts. And his 7-year-old had just asked me to hide him from kidnappers. From somewhere in the estate I heard voices. Harsh, foreign, Russian, maybe. The sound of doors slamming open. Systematic searching. They were already here. Rodri's blue eyes went impossibly wide. His small body went rigid with terror. I had a choice. Walk away and stay invisible, or help him and step into a world I didn't understand. I thought about my brother Elijah, wasting away in a care facility. I thought about my parents, dead 2 years ago, because I wasn't fast enough to save them from that drunk driver. I thought about 2 years of being nobody, going nowhere, barely surviving. I grabbed the laundry cart. Get in, I whispered. Don't make a sound. I didn't know that this moment would bring Silvio Bellucci crashing into my life, that he would offer me a blank check, and I would refuse it, that I would ask for something impossible instead, and that he would give it to me because I'd given him back the only thing he loved more than power. All I knew was that I had 15 minutes to keep this child alive. And this time, maybe I could be fast enough. In just a moment, you're going to meet the most dangerous man in Boston, and watch Anne make a decision that will bind her to his world forever. But first, if you're already hooked on this story, show some love by hitting like and subscribe. You don't want to miss what comes next. Let's continue. Anne dumped the industrial laundry cart's contents onto the kitchen floor, white linen scattering across gleaming tile. Her hands shook as she worked. Adrenaline, making everything feel sharp and immediate. Climb in, sweetheart, she whispered to Rodri. Stay quiet no matter what happens. The boy obeyed without hesitation, curling himself into the canvas bin with Mr. Buttons pressed against his chest. Anne piled linens back over him, not enough to suffocate, but enough to hide a small 7-year-old from casual observation. The voices were getting closer. She could make out individual words now, harsh consonants that sounded like threats, even though she couldn't understand the language. Anne grabbed her mop and bucket, positioning herself behind the cart like she belonged there. Just another servant. Another piece of furniture doing her job at an ungodly hour. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 2 men rounded the corner together, both sharp edges and cold eyes, dressed in dark suits that did nothing to hide the bulges of weapons at their hips. The first one barked something in Russian to his companion, both sets of eyes sweeping the corridor with predatory efficiency. Anne kept her eyes down, submissive, harmless, beneath notice. Morning, she mumbled, her voice cracking slightly. The first man's gaze slid over her, dismissing her in an instant. Just another maid. He said something else in Russian, probably asking if they'd checked the East Wing, and both men continued past her without a second glance. Anne forced herself to move at a normal pace, pushing the cart through the service corridors like her life didn't depend on it. Like she wasn't smuggling the son of Boston's most dangerous crime boss past armed kidnappers. Like this was just another shift in a life full of thankless shifts. Past the break room, through the storage corridor, around the corner to the supply area. She made it to the storage room and locked the door with shaking hands. You can come out now, she whispered. Rodri emerged from the linens slowly, his blue eyes enormous in his pale face. He hadn't made a single sound the entire time, the kind of unnatural silence that came from pure terror. Anne crouched in front of him, ignoring the protest from her knees. Rodri, I need you to trust me. Is there a number? A way to call your papa directly? The boy studied her face for a long moment, deciding if she was safe, if he could trust this stranger who'd hidden him in a laundry cart. Then he reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a laminated card. School emergency contact information. At the bottom, written in careful script, in case of emergency, call this number first. A Boston area code that would connect her directly to Silvio Bellucci. Anne pulled out her ancient flip phone, the one she kept for emergencies because the minutes cost too much for regular use. Her fingers trembled as she dialed. 1 ring. 2. 3. Who is this? The voice was male, low, dangerous. An accent that made even those 3 words sound like a promise of violence. I have Rodri. Anne forced the words out fast, before fear could stop her. I'm Anne Crawford. I work at the Ashworth estate. I found him hiding in the kitchen. He's safe, but there are men here searching for him. He said they kidnapped him from school. Silence. Not empty silence. The kind where you could feel someone's entire world shifting on the other end of the line. Put him on. Not a request. A command. Anne handed Rodri the phone and watched his face transform, terror melting into desperate relief as he heard his father's voice. Papa, he whispered, the single word seeming to take all his courage. Then his hands started moving in fluid sign language, painting words in the air that Anne couldn't understand. After a moment that felt like an eternity, Rodri handed the phone back. Miss Crawford. The voice had changed, still dangerous, but something else underneath now. Controlled desperation. Where exactly are you? Storage room. East Service Wing. Ground level. Are you armed? No. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone. I will be there in 15 minutes. A pause. If anyone tries to enter before I arrive, hide. Make yourself invisible. The line went dead. Anne looked at Rodri, who was watching her with absolute trust. 15 minutes. She just had to keep him safe for 15 minutes. Your papa is coming, Anne told Rodri, trying to sound confident instead of terrified. But we need to hide until he gets here. Can you be brave for me? Rodri nodded solemnly and held out his small hand. Anne took it and pulled him toward the back of the storage room. The industrial supply shelf stood against the far wall, creating a narrow gap barely large enough for one person. It would have to be enough. From somewhere in the estate, she heard shouting. Glass breaking. A door slamming with enough force to echo through the corridors. They were tearing the place apart, looking for him. Come on, Anne whispered, guiding Rodri into the cramped space behind the shelf. She squeezed in after him, pulling her knees to her chest and wrapping her arms around the boy. He pressed Mr. Buttons between them and leaned his head against her shoulder. Anne's legs were already cramping, her back pressed against cold concrete. Every breath sounded impossibly loud in the confined space. Through the gap in the shelving, she could see the storage room door. The lock looked flimsy now, like it wouldn't stop anyone who really wanted in. Minutes crawled by like hours. Then, footsteps in the corridor. Heavy boots. Multiple sets. The doorknob rattled. Rodri went absolutely still in her arms. Anne clamped her hand over her mouth to muffle her ragged breathing. Someone said something in Russian. Another voice responded, sharp and impatient. The doorknob rattled again, more violently. Then a sharp crack. Wood splintering as they forced the lock. The door burst open. 2 men entered, both in dark suits, both moving with military precision. They swept the room with professional efficiency, speaking in rapid Russian as they searched. Anne pressed herself further back against the wall, making herself as small as possible. Rodri's small body trembled against hers, his fingers clutching Mr. Buttons so tightly she was afraid the worn teddy bear would tear. One of the men walked right past their hiding spot, so close Anne could have reached out and touched his boot. He kicked aside a bucket, the metal clattering across the floor, pulled open a cabinet and rifled through cleaning supplies. The other man said something, a question, based on the inflection. The first man responded, frustrated. They were moving toward the door when one of them stopped. Turned back, started walking directly toward the shelf. Anne's heart stopped. This was it. This was how it ended. She was going to die in a storage closet, and Elijah would never get his treatment, and this terrified little boy would be dragged back to whatever nightmare he'd escaped from. Gunshots. 3 rapid cracks from somewhere else in the estate. Shouting in Russian. More gunshots. A full firefight erupting. The man near the shelf barked an order and ran from the room, pulling a weapon from inside his jacket. His companion followed, already speaking urgently into a radio. The door slammed shut behind them. Anne stayed frozen, counting her heartbeats. 60, 90, 120. The gunfire continued, sharp cracks echoing through the estate, punctuated by shouting and the sound of running feet. Rodri's face was buried in her shoulder now, his small body shaking with silent sobs. Anne stroked his matted blonde hair, making soothing sounds she wasn't sure he could even hear over his own terror. Shh, she whispered. It's okay. Your papa is coming. Just a little longer. Outside, the gunfire stopped, as suddenly as it had started. New voices now. Still foreign, but different. Commands barked with absolute authority. Organized. Military. Then, cutting through everything else, a single voice that made Rodri's entire body go rigid, with a different kind of tension. Rodri! The boy exploded from their hiding spot before Anne could stop him, scrambling toward the door with desperate strength. She lunged after him, terrified he was running toward danger. Rodri fumbled with the lock, his small hands shaking. The door burst open from the outside, and Silvio Bellici filled the doorway. He was nothing like Anne had imagined. Younger than she'd expected, maybe early 40s, with dark hair and darker eyes that swept the room with lethal intensity. He wore tactical gear, black combat clothes, a holster visible at his hip. Blood spattered his sleeves, but when those dark eyes landed on Rodri, everything in them shattered. "Rodri," he breathed, dropping to his knees. The boy launched himself into his father's arms. Anne watched from the shadows as Silvio Bellucci wrapped his arms around his son like the boy might disappear if he loosened his grip. His hands, large, capable, clearly designed for violence, shook as they ran over Rodri's small body, checking for injuries with desperate thoroughness. Rodri's hands moved frantically, signing so fast, the movements blurred together. His small face was pressed against his father's chest, and finally, Anne could hear him making sounds. Not words, but broken noises of relief and terror and overwhelming emotion. Silvio responded in sign language, his large hands moving with surprising grace and fluidity. His face was wet, with tears he didn't bother to hide, and Anne realized she was witnessing something intensely private. Something not meant for her eyes. She stayed very still, barely breathing. After what felt like forever, Silvio looked up. His gaze found her, still crouched by the shelf, and the weight of his attention was like a physical force. "You're Anne Crawford." Not a question, a statement of fact. "Yes." Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. He stood slowly, keeping Rodri cradled against his chest with one arm. The boy had wrapped his legs around his father's waist, face still hidden against Silvio's shoulder, Mr. Buttons dangling from one small hand. "You found him," Silvio said, "behind the dishwasher, in the kitchen, and you hid him, protected him." His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, like he was cataloging every detail, every micro-expression, filing her away in some mental database. Anne nodded, unsure what else to say. "What did you say to a man who looked at you like he was trying to decide if you were a threat or a miracle?" "The men who were here," she started. "Dead." His voice was flat. "Final. All of them." Anne swallowed hard. She'd heard the gunshots, had known, on some level, what they meant, but hearing it stated so matter-of-factly made it real in a way that turned her stomach. She didn't know what she'd been about to say. "Come," Silvio said, turning toward the door. "This place isn't safe. There may be more." "I can't just leave," Anne protested. "I work here. I have a shift starting in 20 minutes. He turned back, and the look he gave her made the words die in her throat. "Miss Crawford," he said quietly, "you stopped being just a maid the moment you picked up that phone. You're involved now, which means you're a target." He paused. "The Volkov organization doesn't forgive. They don't forget. And they will want to know how their entire team died, and my son escaped." Ice flooded Anne's veins. "They'll come after me? If they find out about your involvement, yes." His expression was unreadable, "which is why you're coming with me." Now, it wasn't a request. Anne thought about arguing, about insisting she could take care of herself, that she had a life, that she couldn't just abandon everything because she'd helped a child. But the bodies in the hallway said otherwise. The blood on Silvio's sleeves said otherwise. The armed men who'd hunted through the estate said otherwise. She'd stepped into a world she didn't understand, and the only person offering her a way to survive it was standing in front of her, holding his son, telling her she had no choice. "Okay," Anne heard herself say. "Okay." Silvio nodded once and headed for the door. Anne followed, her cheap work shoes squeaking on the tile. The hallway outside was worse than she'd imagined. 4 bodies sprawled in positions that spoke of violent, sudden death. Pools of blood spreading across expensive marble. The metallic smell thick enough to taste. "Don't look," Silvio said, but his voice was gentler than before. Anne turned her face away and kept walking, focusing on the back of Silvio's tactical vest, on the way Rodri's small hand clutched his father's shoulder. Outside, the early morning air hit her like a slap. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene given what had just happened. The Ashworth Estate's driveway was filled with black SUVs, at least 6 of them, engines running, armed men standing at attention like soldiers. Anne stopped walking. This was insane. She couldn't get in a car with a man she didn't know, surrounded by armed guards because she'd made one good decision. But what choice did she have? Anne watched from the shadows as Silvio Bellucci wrapped his arms around his son like the boy might disappear if he loosened his grip. His hands, large, capable, clearly designed for violence, shook as they ran over Rodri's small body, checking for injuries with desperate thoroughness. Rodri's hands moved frantically, signing so fast, the movements blurred together. His small face was pressed against his father's chest, and finally, Anne could hear him making sounds. Not words, but broken noises of relief and terror and overwhelming emotion. Silvio responded in sign language, his large hands moving with surprising grace and fluidity. His face was wet, with tears he didn't bother to hide, and Anne realized she was witnessing something intensely private. Something not meant for her eyes. She stayed very still, barely breathing. After what felt like forever, Silvio looked up. His gaze found her, still crouched by the shelf, and the weight of his attention was like a physical force. "You're Anne Crawford." Not a question, a statement of fact. Yes, her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. He stood slowly, keeping Rodri cradled against his chest with one arm. The boy had wrapped his legs around his father's waist, face still hidden against Silvio's shoulder, Mr. Buttons dangling from one small hand. "You found him," Silvio said, "behind the dishwasher, in the kitchen, and you hid him, protected him." His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, like he was cataloging every detail, every micro-expression, filing her away in some mental database. Anne nodded, unsure what else to say. "What did you say to a man who looked at you like he was trying to decide if you were a threat or a miracle?" "The men who were here," she started. "Dead." His voice was flat. "Final. All of them." Anne swallowed hard. She'd heard the gunshots, had known, on some level, what they meant. But hearing it stated so matter-of-factly made it real, in a way that turned her stomach. She didn't know what she'd been about to say. "Come," Silvio said, turning toward the door. "This place isn't safe. There may be more." "I can't just leave," Anne protested. "I work here. I have a shift starting in 20 minutes. He turned back, and the look he gave her made the words die in her throat. "Already moved to a secure location," Silvio interrupted. "My men picked him up 30 minutes ago. He'll be at my estate shortly, with full medical staff attending him." Anne stared at him. "How did you even?" "I make it my business to know everything about people who touch my son's life." He glanced down at Rodri, who had finally relaxed enough to loosen his death grip. "You have a brother with a degenerative muscular condition. You've been working 3 jobs for 2 years to save for an experimental treatment. You have exactly $31,247 in your savings account as of last night." The specific number made her skin crawl. He'd looked into her entire life in the space of a car ride. "I could write you a check right now," Silvio continued, his voice matter-of-fact. "Cover the treatment. Set you up for life. Consider it payment for saving my son." Anne's heart lurched. Everything she'd been working for, handed to her in a single moment. Elijah, healthy. Her, free from the crushing weight of 3 jobs and impossible dreams. But something in Silvio's eyes told her that accepting would come with strings she couldn't see yet. That nothing in his world was ever truly free. "You're thinking about saying no," Silvio observed. "I'm thinking about what it would cost me." "Smart." He leaned back slightly. "So tell me, Miss Crawford, if not money, what do you want?" Anne opened her mouth, then closed it. What did she want? She'd spent 2 years with her head down, focused solely on saving money. She'd never let herself want anything beyond that singular goal. But now, sitting in this expensive car with this dangerous man and his traumatized son, she found herself thinking about trust. About safety. About the way Rodri had looked at her with absolute faith that she would protect him. "I want to think about it," she said finally, "before I ask for something I can't take back." Silvio studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. Small, but genuine. "You're smarter than I thought, Miss Crawford." "Good. You'll need that intelligence to survive in my world." Silvio's estate made the Ashworth property look like a garden shed. The main house sprawled across at least 10 acres of manicured grounds, all stone and glass and architectural impossibility. Guards were positioned at regular intervals along the perimeter, discreet but visible, a reminder that this wasn't just wealth on display. This was a fortress. Anne followed Silvio through the front entrance, her cheap work shoes squeaking on marble floors that probably cost more than her annual salary. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. Original artwork lined the walls, pieces she'd seen in magazines, the kind that sold at auction for millions. Everything gleamed with the kind of perfection that came from having an army of people whose sole job was maintaining it. "Your brother arrived about 20 minutes ago," Silvio said, still carrying Rodri. The boy had finally fallen asleep against his father's chest, exhausted from trauma and relief. He's in the medical wing with Dr. Petrov. Medical wing, Anne repeated faintly. Of course he had a medical wing. Fully equipped. Better than most hospitals. Silvio led her through a maze of corridors. Elijah will stay there until we can arrange his transfer to the treatment program. Dr. Petrov is excellent. He'll keep your brother comfortable. They turned a corner and nearly collided with a woman in her 60s. Elegant in a way that made Anne acutely aware of her stained work uniform and disheveled appearance. Silvio, the woman said, then switched immediately to rapid Italian when she saw Rodri. Her hands went to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. He's safe, Mama, Silvio replied in English, probably for Anne's benefit. Miss Crawford found him, protected him. The woman, Silvio's mother, turned to Anne with an intensity that made her want to step backward. Then, before Anne could react, she was being pulled into a crushing embrace. Thank you, the woman whispered fiercely in accented English. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I just did what anyone would do, Anne managed. No, Silvio's mother pulled back, gripping Anne's shoulders hard enough to leave marks. Most people would have walked away, would have been too afraid, too smart, to get involved. She looked Anne directly in the eyes. You risked your life for my grandson. That is not what anyone would do. Anne didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that she hadn't really thought about risk at all. She'd just seen a terrified child and reacted. Miss Crawford needs to see her brother, Silvio said. Mama, can you take Rodri? I need to speak with her privately. His mother took the sleeping boy carefully, pressing a kiss to his forehead before carrying him away down another corridor. Anne watched them go, feeling suddenly unmoored. This way, Silvio said. He led her deeper into the estate, through corridors that seemed to go on forever. They passed a library that could have swallowed her entire apartment, a formal dining room with a table that could seat 30, a conservatory with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens that looked like they belonged in a European palace. Finally, they reached a set of double doors. Silvio pushed them open to reveal what had to be the medical wing. It was exactly what he'd promised, a full hospital setup complete with monitoring equipment, private rooms, nurses' station, and enough medical technology to make most hospitals jealous. And there, in the third room on the left, was Elijah. Her brother was awake, propped up in a bed that looked more comfortable than anything she'd ever slept on. He was pale, thin, his 19-year-old body wasted by the disease that had been stealing him away piece by piece for the past 3 years. But when he saw her, his face lit up with his old smile, the one from before the disease had started destroying his muscles. Annie, he said, his voice weak but warm. They told me you were coming. What the hell is going on? These people showed up at the facility and just took me. Very politely, but still. Anne crossed to his bedside and took his hand. Careful, always careful, because his muscles were deteriorating, and even gentle touch could cause pain sometimes. It's complicated, she said. The scary Italian guy said you saved his kid. Elijah's green eyes, the same shade as hers, sparkled with amusement. That true? I found a little boy who needed help. And now we're in his private hospital. Elijah looked around the room. Annie, what did you get us into? Anne opened her mouth to answer, but didn't know where to start. Anne told Elijah everything. Well, not everything. She left out the dead bodies, the blood on Silvio's sleeves, the casual way he'd talked about murder. But she told him about finding Rodri, about the armed men hunting through the estate, about the phone call and Silvio's arrival. So you're under the protection of a Mafia boss, Elijah said when she finished. His thin fingers tightened on hers with what little strength he had. Annie, do you understand how insane that sounds? I know. And you're okay with it? Anne thought about the question seriously. Was she okay with it? Silvio Bellucci ran criminal operations. He killed people. He existed in a world of violence and moral compromise that she'd spent her entire life avoiding. But he'd also dropped to his knees and cried when he held his son. He'd moved Elijah to safety without being asked. He'd offered her a blank check, and she believed he would honor it. I don't know if I'm okay with it, Anne said honestly. But I know that I was drowning, Elijah. 3 jobs, no sleep, watching you get worse every day while I scraped together pennies. She paused. I was drowning, and he threw me a rope. Maybe it's a rope with blood on it, but it's still a rope. Elijah studied her face for a long moment. You're different, he said finally. Since Mom and Dad died, since the accident, you've been hollow, going through motions. His eyes were too knowing. But right now, telling me this story, you look alive again. The observation hit harder than Anne expected, because he was right. She had been hollow, had spent 2 years in a fog of grief and survival and guilt that never quite let her breathe. That night was burned into her memory. The drunk driver swerving into their lane, her desperate attempt to avoid him, the moment she realized she wasn't fast enough. Her parents died instantly. She'd walked away with minor injuries, and the crushing knowledge that if she'd been faster, better, more alert, they might have survived. And then there was Elijah. His disease had started a year before the accident. She'd watched him begin to weaken, had started saving money even then. But after the accident, with no parents and no safety net, the weight of his care had fallen entirely on her shoulders. 2 years of grinding herself down to nothing, trying to save him. Anne didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that she hadn't really thought about risk at all. She'd just seen a terrified child and reacted. "Miss Crawford needs to see her brother," Silvio said. "Mama, can you take Rodri? I need to speak with her privately." His mother took the sleeping boy carefully, pressing a kiss to his forehead before carrying him away down another corridor. Anne watched them go, feeling suddenly unmoored. "This way," Silvio said. He led her deeper into the estate, through corridors that seemed to go on forever. They passed a library that could have swallowed her entire apartment, a formal dining room with a table that could seat 30, a conservatory with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens that looked like they belonged in a European palace. Finally, they reached a set of double doors. Silvio pushed them open to reveal what had to be the medical wing. It was exactly what he'd promised, a full hospital setup complete with monitoring equipment, private rooms, nurses' station, and enough medical technology to make most hospitals jealous. And there, in the third room on the left, was Elijah. Her brother was awake, propped up in a bed that looked more comfortable than anything she'd ever slept on. He was pale, thin, his 19-year-old body wasted by the disease that had been stealing him away piece by piece for the past 3 years. But when he saw her, his face lit up with his old smile, the one from before the disease had started destroying his muscles. "Annie," he said, his voice weak but warm. "They told me you were coming. What the hell is going on? These people showed up at the facility and just took me." Very politely, but still. Anne crossed to his bedside and took his hand. Careful, always careful, because his muscles were deteriorating, and even gentle touch could cause pain sometimes. "It's complicated," she said. "The scary Italian guy said you saved his kid." Elijah's green eyes, the same shade as hers, sparkled with amusement. "That true? I found a little boy who needed help. And now we're in his private hospital." Elijah looked around the room. "Annie, what did you get us into?" Anne opened her mouth to answer, but didn't know where to start. "I know it's substantial," Anne said, refusing to look away from Silvio's intense gaze. "But you asked what I wanted. That's my answer. The kind of protection you're asking for. It's not a check I can write and walk away from. It's a commitment, an ongoing one." Silvio's fingers drummed once on the desk. "It would mean bringing you into my world, my actual world, not just the edges of it." "I understand. I don't think you do." He leaned forward. "It would mean people knowing you're under my protection. It would mean becoming visible in ways you can't imagine. It would mean changing your entire life." Anne thought about her apartment. The cockroaches, the neighbors who screamed through thin walls, the mattress on the floor because she couldn't afford a bed frame. She thought about her 3 jobs, the endless exhaustion, the slow suffocation of just surviving. 2 years of that, 2 years of barely breathing. "My life changed the moment I found Rodri," she said. "You said I can't unmake myself visible. So instead of hiding, I want to be visible in a way that makes me safe. That makes Elijah safe." Silvio studied her for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right, Miss Crawford. You saved the only thing in this world I care about, more than my own life. I'll give you what you're asking for." He paused. "But understand this. Once you're under my protection, you're part of my world. There's no going back. No returning to your old life, when you decide you've had enough." "Are you certain?" Anne thought about the question. Really thought about it. Once she agreed, there would be no more anonymity, no more blending into the background. She would be known as the woman under Silvio Bellucci's protection. She would be visible, exposed, but she would also be safe. And Elijah would get the treatment he needed. "I'm certain," she said. "Your official title will be Rodri's nanny," Silvio continued. "It's a cover that explains your constant presence in the estate, gives you legitimate reason to be close to my son, and provides a salary that won't raise suspicions." "I don't know anything about being a nanny," Anne protested. "You kept a 7-year-old safe during a kidnapping attempt and manhunt. I think you'll manage bedtime stories." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Besides, Rodri has already decided he trusts you. That's not something that happens easily." Anne thought about the way Rodri had whispered to her, those precious few words that seemed to cost him everything. The way he'd held her hand, the way he'd looked at her with absolute faith. What happened to his mother? She asked quietly. Silvio's expression shuddered immediately. She died 3 years ago. Cancer. His voice was carefully neutral. Rodri stopped speaking shortly after. Selective mutism. Psychological, not physical. He communicates through sign language, and, occasionally, with people he feels completely safe with, he'll whisper a few words. Like he'd whispered to her in the storage room. "Please don't tell them where I am. He spoke to me," Anne said. "I know. You're the first person outside family he's spoken to since Elena died." Silvio's dark eyes held hers. "That's why you're not just a cover story, Miss Crawford. Rodri needs someone who isn't part of this world. Someone normal. Someone who sees him as a child first, and the Bellucci heir second." The weight of that responsibility settled on Anne's shoulders. She was being asked to be more than just a nanny. She was being asked to be safe harbor for a traumatized child who'd learned too young that the world was dangerous. "And the Volkov organization?" she asked. "Being handled. My men are tracking their remaining cells in Boston. Within the week, the threat will be eliminated." He said it so casually, like he was discussing a business merger instead of systematic murder. Anne swallowed hard. This was the reality of the world she was stepping into. Violence as a business strategy. Death as a problem-solving tool. "When the threat is eliminated," she said slowly, "what happens then? Then you decide if you want to stay, if you want to keep being Rodri's nanny, or if you want to leave." Silvio's expression softened slightly. "I keep my promises, Miss Crawford. Your brother will get the treatment regardless. You'll have enough money to start over somewhere safe, whether you stay or go." The fact that he was giving her an out made Anne trust him more than any threat could have. "I'll stay," she said, "at least for now." Silvio stood, extending his hand across the desk. "Then welcome to the family, Miss Crawford." Anne shook his hand, sealing a deal that would change everything. Anne's quarters were larger than her entire apartment. A suite, actually. Bedroom, sitting room, private bathroom with a tub that could double as a swimming pool. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the estate's gardens. Furniture that was probably worth more than she'd earned in her entire life. A knock at the door interrupted her stunned examination of her new living space. "Come in," she called. Silvio's mother entered, carrying an armful of clothes. "I'm Isabella," she said warmly. "We weren't properly introduced earlier. I was too busy crying and thanking God." She smiled. "These should fit you. We're similar size, I think." Anne looked at the clothes. Expensive fabrics, designer labels, the kind of things she'd never dreamed of owning. "I can't accept." "You can, and you will." Isabella's tone was firm, but kind. "You can't care for Rodri in a maid's uniform. Besides, you're family now. Family takes care of each other." Family. The word hit Anne harder than it should have. Isabella set the clothes down and took Anne's hands. "I need you to understand something. What you did this morning, hiding my grandson, calling Silvio, keeping Rodri safe. You gave me back my reason for living." Her eyes were wet. "After Elena died, Rodri was all we had left of her. If something had happened to him." She didn't finish the sentence. "Didn't need to. I'm glad I was there," Anne said quietly. "So am I." Isabella squeezed her hands. "Dinner is at 7. Family meal, in the dining room. Rodri will want to see you." After Isabella left, Anne showered. Her first hot shower in months, where she didn't have to worry about the water bill or the hot water running out after 5 minutes. She dressed in the clothes Isabella had brought. Dark jeans that fit perfectly. A soft cashmere sweater that probably cost more than a week's wages. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. At 7, she made her way to the dining room, following the sound of voices. The room was smaller than she'd expected. Intimate, with a table that seated 8 instead of 30. Clearly the family dining room, not the formal one. Silvio was already seated at the head of the table. Isabella sat to his right. And Rodri, clean now, dressed in fresh clothes, his blonde hair still damp from a bath, sat in the chair next to his grandmother. When he saw Anne, his entire face lit up. He signed something quickly, his hands moving with excited energy. "He says you look pretty," Silvio translated, something warm in his voice. "That you don't look like a maid anymore." Anne felt herself blush. "Thank you, sweetheart." Rodri patted the chair next to him, a clear invitation. Anne sat, and immediately felt a small hand slip into hers under the table. Rodri didn't look at her, just kept his hand in hers while Isabella served food. Homemade pasta, salad, bread that smelled like heaven. It was the most surreal meal of Anne's life. Sitting at a Mafia boss's family table, holding his traumatized son's hand, being treated like she belonged there. "How's your brother?" Silvio asked between courses. "Comfortable. Happy." Anne paused, confused about why a crime boss is being so generous. Isabella laughed. Smart boy. I like him already. The treatment program confirmed his placement, Silvio said. He starts in 2 weeks. Dr. Petrov will coordinate the transfer and ensure continuity of care. 2 weeks. After 2 years of impossible dreams, Elijah would finally get the help he needed. Thank you, Anne said, her voice thick. You saved my son, Silvio replied simply. There is nothing you could ask for that would be too much. After dinner, Isabella took Rodri upstairs for bed. The boy hugged Anne before he left, a tight, desperate embrace that spoke of fear that she might disappear. I'll be here in the morning, she promised him. I'm not going anywhere. Rodri signed something, and Silvio translated. He wants to know if you'll read him a story tomorrow. Anne felt something crack in her chest. I'd love to. As she watched Rodri climb the stairs with his grandmother, Anne realized something startling. For the first time in 2 years, since that night when she'd failed to save her parents, she felt like she had a purpose beyond survival. She felt necessary. And maybe, just maybe, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Anne woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and, for one disorienting moment, had no idea where she was. Then it all came rushing back. Rodri. The kidnapping. Silvio. The deal. Her new life. She dressed in clothes from the wardrobe Isabella had filled. Jeans, a simple blouse, nothing too formal. When she looked in the mirror, she still barely recognized herself. The dark circles under her eyes were fading. She looked rested for the first time in 2 years. A soft knock at her door. Come in, she called. A young woman in staff uniform entered with a breakfast tray. Mr. Bellucci thought you might prefer to eat in your room this morning. Get settled. She smiled. I'm Maria, by the way, part of the household staff. Anne, she replied, feeling awkward. Yesterday she'd been staff. Today she was being served by staff. Rodri has been asking for you since he woke up, Maria said with a knowing smile. He's in the playroom, 3rd floor, East Wing. I can show you? Please. Anne followed Maria through corridors that were slowly becoming familiar. The estate was massive, but it had a warmth that the Ashworth property had lacked. Family photos on the walls. Children's artwork framed like masterpieces. Signs of life beyond just wealth. The playroom was bright and colorful, filled with books, toys, art supplies, everything a child could want. And there, sitting at a small table with crayons spread before him, was Rodri. He looked up when she entered, and his entire face transformed. He was on his feet and across the room in seconds, wrapping his arms around her waist. Anne hugged him back, stroking his blonde hair. Good morning, sweetheart. He pulled back and signed something. Fast, enthusiastic. I don't know sign language yet, Anne said gently. Can you show me? Rodri's eyes lit up with excitement. He took her hand and led her to the table, where he'd been drawing. A picture of a woman with dark hair, holding hands, with a small boy. Between them, a teddy bear, with one missing eye. Is this us? Anne asked. Rodri nodded enthusiastically and signed again, slower this time, like he was trying to teach her. You'll have to help me learn, Anne said. Will you be my teacher? Another nod, more vigorous. Then he picked up a crayon and wrote carefully at the bottom of the picture. Anne, plus Rodri, plus Mr. Buttons. Anne felt tears prick her eyes. Can I keep this? Rodri handed it to her solemnly, then immediately started another drawing. For the next hour, Anne sat with him, watching him create worlds in crayon and marker. He didn't speak, didn't even try, but he communicated constantly through drawings, through sign language. She was starting to understand through context, through the way he'd touch her arm when he wanted her attention. This was what Silvio meant, she realized. Rodri needed someone who could exist in his silence without trying to fill it, who could meet him where he was, instead of demanding he come to where they were. Miss Crawford. Anne looked up to find Silvio in the doorway, watching them with an unreadable expression. Mr. Bellucci, she said, starting to stand. Silvio, he corrected. We're past formality. He walked into the room, and Rodri immediately showed him the new drawing, this one of 3 people. A tall man, a woman, and a small boy. Silvio's expression softened as he looked at his son's artwork. He signed something, and Rodri responded with animated hands. He says you're a good teacher, Silvio translated. That you listen with your eyes, not just your ears. Anne's throat tightened. He's easy to understand. Not for most people. Silvio met her eyes. You made the right choice, staying. He needs you. He needs you. Not I need you to take care of him. The distinction was subtle, but important. I need to check on Elijah, Anne said. Is that okay? Of course. Rodri has lessons with his tutor this afternoon anyway. Silvio paused. Tonight, I'd like you to join me for dinner. Just us. We should discuss boundaries, expectations, how this arrangement will work long term. All right. As Anne left the playroom, Rodri's drawing clutched in her hand. She realized something profound. She wasn't drowning anymore. For the first time since that night 2 years ago, since the accident that took her parents and left her with crushing guilt and impossible responsibility, she could breathe. She had purpose. She had safety. She had someone who needed her. And maybe, just maybe, this time she'd been fast enough to save someone who mattered. Maybe she could finally forgive herself for not being fast enough before. So what do you think? Did Anne make the right choice? Would you have accepted Silvio's protection or taken the money and run? Let me know in the comments. And if you're hungry for more stories about dangerous men, impossible choices, and unexpected love, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload.